We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Good tidings to you and all of you, good tidings for praise.
Hi everyone, I'm Cathy, the Clumsy Soaper. Today I'd like to share some information on lye safety, properties, preparation, and some tips and tricks. And if you are new here in my channel, please consider subscribing for a soap making video, DIY tutorials, or recipe sharing from me. Soap making is my passion, so I'd really appreciate if you can join me in my soap making journey so we could learn and grow together. So, let's get started!
Today we will talk about lye. I'm very nervous. This is my first time to go live. And for those who don't know me, I'm Cathy, the Clumsy Soaper. So, before we start, we need to talk about safety first. So, what we need will be, you need to have a hair net or a hair cap. So, make sure that you tie your hair so that when you do your activity, your hair doesn't fall anywhere. And you also have to protect your eyes. Here I have a goggles. So yeah, so you will need to protect your eyes with the goggles. So let's just put this one there. And we also need to avoid inhaling any fumes. So with that, you will need to have a respirator or a mask. So I have this one. And you also have to protect your hands and your skin. So if possible, wear long sleeves, or in the lab I wear lab gown, or you also can wear a lab coat. And you will need gloves. There are many types of gloves. This one is a vinyl gloves. But for chemicals, you can also use this type. This is a nitrile glove. Don't use gloves used for cooking. It's not chemical resistant. So if you watch my videos before, you will see that I would either use this type or this type. Alright, so that's what we need. And we also, as I mentioned, you will need your lab coat or your apron. So I have here an apron, and I'm not sure whether you can see it. Yeah, so these are just back up. I'm already wearing my goggles and my apron. So let me just set this aside. Always remember that we need to protect ourselves. And let me wear my gloves. Okay, so we've already mentioned what we need to protect ourselves. But what if there is a spillage or any problems that occur when we are doing our experiments or our soap making? So we also need to have this one. This is a squeeze bottle. I filled it up with water. So later we'll discuss more on this one. So this is very important. It doesn't have to be inside the squeeze bottle, but when you do your experiments or your soap making, you have to make sure that you are near water source and you can easily access water beside you. So this is okay. So we'll set this aside again. And for the environment, you have to make sure that you work in a well-ventilated area. So you cannot see my window here, but I am working near the window right now. It's important that you always have your paper and a pen. It's always important because let's just say that I have here this bottle of sodium hydroxide. So it will always have an expiration date. When you do your records for your soap making, it's important that you also record expiration dates, or when do you do your experiment. You also have to record down the weights and everything. Because remember, when we make soap, maybe we make our batch of soap today, but maybe in another 3-4 weeks, we will be doing another batch of the same thing. So, to be more consistent and to also, if in case there will be some people who would complain, I had this issue with my skin. What happened with the soap? Is it because of the soap? But you know that from your records, it shows that, yeah, I've already followed everything. It's not lye heavy. My batch are all, the chemicals that I used are all fresh. So, your record will always protect you. So, always make sure that you have that with you. And when we make soap, we also have to remember that not everyone will behave the same way in chemicals. So, there are people who are allergic to some allergens, or they have skin sensitivity. So these are also some of the factors that we need to do or to have to consider when we make our soaps. But for today, we will be just focusing about lye solution, and parents, just make sure that when you are soap making, please let your kids tell your kids not to go near you, especially when you are handling lye solution. Because for us, we know how to protect ourselves, but aside from protecting ourselves, we also have to protect those people around us. And another very, very important thing to remember is please know your local emergency number. I think we still have to continue talking about safety because I've noticed that in some of the groups, or even in this group, when people ask on what to do when there's a lye spillage on, or whether they spilled sodium hydroxide into their skin, they normally would use or would recommend to use vinegar instead of water for washing the skin. That's a myth. We need to use vinegar to wash any spillage on the table, but in our skin, we need to wash it with water. If possible, running water, and it should be cold. So, for today, I would also like to demonstrate more on that. I prepared this, and I have, okay, this is the one that I have in the fridge. It's a meat. And let's just pretend that this meat is our skin, of course. Yeah? So I have the skin and the meat there. I'd like to cut this into 4 parts. So let's cut into 4. Okay, also, I cannot read your comments now. I'll try to answer your questions later. So, we already have this 4. And let me just grab a container. So, okay, 1. Can you see that? 2. Okay, I cut in front of everyone so that you know that we are not doing any magic trick here, so you all can see what we did. Alright, then we just set this aside. These are the 4 that we have. But I think before we, let me just wipe the table dry for a moment. But before we do something about this meat, I'd like to quickly talk about lye or caustic soda or sodium hydroxide. I have here a bottle of sodium hydroxide and the color of this one. Okay, set this aside first. Not sure whether you can see it, but the color of the powder when it comes to you, because I know some of you, it's your first time to see sodium hydroxide, so sometimes it will come as white as this one, or sometimes it would come a little bit off-white. So don't worry, that color is normal and it's typical, so you don't have to, it's not a matter of concern. And then you will also notice that for the sodium hydroxide that I have right now, these are sodium hydroxide beads, and sometimes it will come into a pellet. I'm not so sure whether I have the pellets now. I think I don't have it, but it will also come like a pellet or a powder or a flake. So sodium hydroxide flakes. So it doesn't matter all these types are all the same. What matters now is the purity of your sodium hydroxide. If you will see here, let me just cover this because sodium hydroxide is hygroscopic. So hygroscopic means when you just leave your sodium hydroxide open, it will absorb moisture from the environment and it will get wet. So always have to make sure that you close the cap tightly so it's not exposed to air. Okay, so as I was saying, I've already said that sodium hydroxide will always come with a purity. I have two different sodium hydroxide sources here. I cannot read this, but it actually means sodium hydroxide. This is written in Polish. It came from Poland, and I have this one. I think the origin is from China. And from here, you will see, let's just use this one as an example. I'm not so sure on whether you can see it, but what I'm seeing here is that it says sodium hydroxide 96%. So the purity of sodium hydroxide for this one is 96. And you will also see sodium carbonate less than 1.5%. Why it's important to also note the sodium carbonate content, because remember, there are some issues when you prepare your soap making, and then one day you will just notice that you have soda ash forming on top of your soap, and then you know that you did water discount, and you also know that you used purified water to prepare your soaps, but then you are still seeing the soda ash on top of your soap. So then what you need to do next is to go back and check your sodium hydroxide. Maybe your sodium hydroxide contains so much or high amounts of sodium carbonate. So no matter what you do, even if you spray isopropyl alcohol on top of the solution, or even if you do water discount, or even if you do use distilled water or purified water for your soap making, you will still have problem with soda ash because the lye solution or the caustic soda that you used contains high amounts of sodium carbonate. So when you go and buy your sodium hydroxide, you have to make sure that you also check on the other components. Now, talking about all these components, sometimes I've also noticed that people would ask, what's the purity of sodium hydroxide that I need to use? If possible, you have to use anything higher than 96%, or the limit should be 96%. So what happens is, if it goes lower than 96%, so let's just use 96% at this point. Remember, you also are doing super fatting. So super fat, it means a portion of your oil will not be converted into soap because you intentionally discounted or reduced the amount of sodium hydroxide for the reaction. So let's just say that for the super fat, what you have written in the soap calculator is you have 5% of the super fat. But because your sodium hydroxide, you are doing the soap calc will take the purity of sodium hydroxide as 100%. So now that this is 96, it means there are 4% by default from our sodium hydroxide that will not react because it's not sodium hydroxide, right? So if originally you have 5% super fat plus the 4% that was by default in your sodium hydroxide, so you have a total of 9% super fat. That's why it's also important that you take the purity in consideration when you buy your sodium hydroxide. Another getaway with that I would normally do is to take the purity into consideration when I do my calculations for how much lye do I need. But so far, for our case, it's not so important because we know that when we increase the super fat, what happens is that we make the soap milder and it becomes gentle. We increase the conditioning, although in the same time, it also reduces the hardness of the soap and its cleansing capacity is also reduced. So all these factors, we also have to take into consideration when we make soaps. Alright, so we've already had spoken about the form, the color, and the purity. Now we talked about the grades. Because when you buy your sodium hydroxide, it will say food grade, commercial grade, industrial grade, technical grade, and reagent grade. So all these types, you can buy it, no issue with that, but you have to make sure that you check the purity, and the sodium hydroxide that you should buy is like this. It should be white. Don't buy those that is used for, I know that there are pure chemicals that you can use for drain. It's a technical grade, so it's no issue at all, but you have to make sure that you don't buy the sodium hydroxide with blue specks. So because they've added some chemicals to that to make sure that people don't use it for other purpose but to clean the drain. Alright, so let's set this aside. I hope everyone is still there. So now let's go back to our meat. So these are, as I've already shown a while ago, these 4 cuts are from the same meat, and I'd like to keep one as is. We will not do anything with this one. And I have here, okay, I have here, inside here is a lye solution. This lye solution is the one that I would normally use for my no stick blender technique. So inside, the concentration of lye is 37%. So now, let's just say, I'm not so sure whether we use this. I think we better use, we reserve this one, and then we better use the pure one so that you can see what happens. Okay, so I'm not so sure how much is the weight of this sodium hydroxide, but let's just put the same amount, maybe this size. Can you see that? So we just spread sodium hydroxide there. So imagine that this is your skin and it came in contact with sodium hydroxide beads. Then another one, same amount. Then we just spread it inside. And another one, we put this one here. Okay. So, alright. Do you want me to continue on solving this problem, or in the meantime? Okay, let's just let it sit for a while, let it stand, and then we will continue on that. Now, let's go back to the squeeze bottle that we have. And I also prepared vinegar here. And I have an indicator. I have phenolphthalein inside. I'll write everything down in the description box later, so that for those who missed this live video, you can watch it later. Let's look for our sodium hydroxide again, and here's our phenolphthalein. Okay, so we have our sodium hydroxide again. Going back, let's pour sodium hydroxide, and the color is white. And then we have a colorless indicator here, as you can see from the color. Then let's just pour it there and see what happens. So now, as we know, as I've already mentioned, this one will make your sodium hydroxide turn dark purple if the concentration is high. So what we need to do now is to make sure to wash this one and make it as light pink as possible, and if we can, let's make it colorless. Later, as I've already mentioned to you, if we have a spillage in our skin, we need to wash it with water, right? But in the table, then you can wash it with vinegar. For when you are doing this one and you have sodium hydroxide in contact with your skin, don't use vinegar. We need to just use water. So let's just look at the table. What happens here? We have a dark purple solution. When we add water to it, water is supposed to lower the concentration, right? But when we add water to it, what happens is that it just spreads out, but the color purple is still there. Although you will notice that here, it already lightened up. But it means when we add more water to it, what happens is that we are spreading the sodium hydroxide spillage in our table. So that is where our vinegar comes in. This is our vinegar, and see what happens? When you put vinegar, it will neutralize sodium hydroxide and it's easier for us to clean. But here we added so much, so you see this color is already changing, but I don't want this to move somewhere, so let me just put it here. So it will automatically change, but when you do and put water to it, see what happens? It will still be the same. So if you do this in the table, we will just be spreading our sodium hydroxide spillage. That's why it's important that you also have a vinegar for the spillage. Okay, I think that is more than enough for the demonstration. We will now move to our meat. Then when you already had neutralized with vinegar, then you can just wash this with water. Alright, so I hope it's clear. Let me just change my gloves because we will move to the meat. Not so sure whether you still can hear me. So we have here our meat without anything. So this is the original one, and we also have the 3 meat here where we added a teaspoonful of sodium hydroxide. Now let's just set this aside and then also set this aside so we know what is happening. And then, as I've already mentioned, if we have lye in our skin, we have to wash it with water and not vinegar. So let's just say that they have the indicator here. This is our indicator with the letter P. Okay, so that's our okay, so then we need to wash. Where is my water? Okay, the proper way to treat your lye burn is to put it into cold running water. So let's just say that this is cold running water and see what happens. but it's still there because it's not. Okay, I'm not so sure whether you can see that, but let me just take out the meat. I think I better wash it this. Okay, my hands is now full with indicator. Okay, so you have to make sure that there's no more purple here. But for today, we won't be cleaning that until it becomes colorless because we will run out of time. Okay, so what happens there is that when we have sodium hydroxide, it burns our skin and it becomes hot. Not so see now this one it's 46.8 and this one is 25.5. Right? Can you see that? There's no hocus pocus happening here. I'm using the same one, and you all know, you saw me cut all this all together. So just the normal one without sodium hydroxide, it's 26.26. But with the skin in contact with sodium hydroxide, it's 40.9 or 46, somewhere there. So it means it's hot. And then the one we washed with water, from 40 plus, it became 31.2. Right? So if we continue on washing our skin with water, then it immediately lowers down the temperature, and then it will cause less damage. So after washing this, you have to make sure that you immediately go to the doctor. Now let's move to the one with we will treat with vinegar, and that's a myth, but I'll just show you now so that you can see it in your eyes. So this is the one where we have the meat and the sodium hydroxide, and I've just added phenolphthalein there so that you can see that the color and the chemical that we added is basic and it's alkali because the color is purple. Okay, so now this is a 45.7, around there. So it's almost the same as this one and this one. Right? This, nothing. This lowered down to 30.8. Then let's say that we have this vinegar with the letter V, and treat this with vinegar. To the vinegar. So what happens is that the color immediately change. Purple is now turning lighter because we are making the reaction. We are producing the reaction. And see what happens? Did it lower it? No. See? That is still 40 plus. 41. We added vinegar. So, we thought, originally, what people were thinking is that when you add vinegar, yeah, it will... Where is my vinegar? This is my vinegar. So, we were originally thinking, some people, as a meat, were thinking that when you add vinegar, yeah, it will neutralize the sodium hydroxide. And it's supposed to help me, but... No. Wait. That is still hot. Right? 39.5. The one with the Sodium hydroxide? Still same. The one that we wash with water, it's 31. So, now, this demonstration, the main purpose, the main takeaway that I'd like you to take from this little experiment is when you have sodium hydroxide in your skin, make sure to wash it with water. And this is just plain water. It's not even cold one. If you have a cold water, then it's much better, so you will easily, it will be soothing to your skin, and also in the same time will take your, okay, let me just quickly, maybe I think I better remove this one here, because I don't want you to think that I'm taking temperature of this one while it is away from the liquid. So let's just take this away, put it there, and then test it again. Plain. This is the one with in contact with sodium hydroxide, not treated. This one is treated with water, and this one is treated with vinegar. See? This is lower than this. Okay? So, give me a moment. Let me just clear this up, and then next we can move to lye preparation. So, I have my weighing balance here. And I also have, when we prepare lye, you have to make sure that you weigh it in this container. This is a plastic container. It's supposed to have a PP mark or a number 5 mark here, but I don't have. So, I'm not so sure what this one is, but I know that since this is a measuring container, it should be PP so that it can resist chemicals. Alright, and then I have here an empty beaker, and here we have our water. Let's just say that for the lye solution, I'd like to prepare, oh no, something is wrong with my this. Okay, let's say that for my lye solution, I'd like to use, okay, say, I'm not so sure whether you can see, 37 grams of NaOH, and then let's use 63 grams of water. When I prepare my lye solution, I use cold water or I use ice, and then here I'll show both on what happens if we use cold water and we just use the normal plain room temperature water. So in this container, okay, I'm not so sure whether everyone knows how to use the balance, so I'll just quickly demonstrate here. So here is our balance or our scale, and then you just have to turn it on and make sure that it is at 0. Then you can put your container 0, and then place your container, and then you tare or press this one again. There's a button in your scale that says tare. So now the weight of this one is 24. When you tare, it will turn 0. Then let's get our sodium hydroxide beads and weigh 37 grams. So for your preparation, it doesn't have to be always 37 grams sodium hydroxide and 63 grams of water. This will all depend on your recipe because each oil will have its own saponification. Okay, so now 37. Each oil will have its own saponification value, so it will require different amount of sodium hydroxide to produce soap. So this is 37, and then let's move to the other one. Let's tare this again, and then as I've mentioned, tare again to 0, and then let's weigh another 37 grams inside. But I'm running out of sodium hydroxide in this bottle. Okay, 1 more gram. Okay, so here is another 37. And we, as I've mentioned, always keep your bottles closed so that it will not absorb moisture. And turn it off. And then let's set this aside. And then now we have, both this contains 37 grams of water. Sodium hydroxide, 37 grams of sodium hydroxide, and we will need 63 grams of water. So now, let's set this aside and let's weigh our water. So, there. And then we will need 63 grams of water. This is just plain purified water, and to show you, it's at room temperature and it's 27.2, and we will need 63 grams of this. Oops, that's too much. Let me find a small container. Okay, so I don't need that much. 2, then another. Okay, so we already have 63. This is our plain purified water at room temperature. I'm not sure whether you can see that. Let's just set this aside. And then, as I've already mentioned to you, when I prepare lye solution, I use ice so that the temperature will be lower. That's 32. Maybe we need another one. 57. I'm not sure whether this one will do. That is 67, so that's too much. I'm taking that out because we only need 67, so maybe for that I just use the water here. So I need 63, so let me just quickly pour the excess in this container. And we have 63. So set this aside, and our ice bucket or ice container, I'll put it away. Then let's just quickly clean this area. Then now let's prepare our lye solution. Okay, I have this spatula. When you prepare lye solution, it's important that what you have to remember is we will dissolve lye into the water. It's always chemical going to the water and not water going to the chemical. So, why? Question would be, Cathy, it's all the same. It will just dissolve. No, there's a difference. Because remember, your sodium hydroxide is concentrated when you pour it or fill it into your water. Since this is water, it dilutes. It automatically dilutes the concentration. So from high concentration going to the low concentration. So if it splatters, then what goes into your skin is a diluted version of your sodium hydroxide or diluted solution of your lye. Right? But if we do it the other way around, you have high concentration here and low concentration here. Technically, there's nothing there. When you pour this water going into your chemical, and if it splatters, what happens is that you will be putting in yourself in danger because the beads are concentrated, getting in contact into your skin. Right? So let's just keep that in mind. Maybe for now, let's start with my own technique. I use cold water. I'm sure most of you are doing the same thing. So we have here the temperature now is negative 02.5. Yeah, so technically there's nothing. It's cold. And then here, temperature, it's 30.3. When we pour, remember, chemical to water. So, chemical to ice. So, just slowly pour everything and place everything inside. Okay. Also have to remember that when you prepare this, you have to use PP, a plastic container. But for now, for me to just show you how to do it, because this is opaque and it's very hard for you to see, right? So I am using this glass container. But make sure that when you do this, you have to do it in a plastic container. Or if you don't have, you can also prepare it in a glass container at the interim, only for the dissolution, for you to dissolve it. But later on, you have to keep it in a plastic container. So now, when we add sodium hydroxide going to our ice or to our water, it will automatically generate heat. So from 0, it becomes, don't know, still cold. So just have to dissolve this one, then just stir. And it will quickly melt your ice, because when sodium hydroxide comes in contact with water, it will automatically generate heat. The reaction for the generation of the heat in chemical term, we call it exothermic. So when you read something in books and it says exothermic, it just simply means that it will generate heat. So now let's see. Still a bit cold, 29.5. So that's why I like this one, because later you will see there it will become hot. But here, still 29 point, or around 30 plus. Let's just set this aside for a while and then continue stirring this one later. But remember, we have that one there. Then let's move to this one. This is our room temperature water, 27.2 degrees. And then we have our lye. I hope you can see it. So now it becomes hot and temperature goes into sorry. Now it's generating heat. You generating fumes. You cannot see that in the video, but you'll see that it increased to 80.4. And this one, 33.8. This will increase 95, 97.9. This is 35. So, okay, let me just use this one. This is 30.8. This is now 93 or 93.3. This is, for this one, remember we use 37 grams sodium hydroxide and 63 grams of ice. For this one, we use 37 grams of sodium hydroxide and 63 grams of room temperature water. See the difference? Because I've already told you that it will generate heat, right? So, even if this one generates heat because we use cold, it started cold, we have ice, we used ice, so it will just go up to 31.8. But for this one, since it already started at room temperature and we added the light, it goes up around 92.6. So, okay, don't use water that is even hot water or lukewarm water because it will increase even more. So, there's no magic here. So, you just have to keep on stirring it until it becomes clear. So, I just stir, then show you. Still same. And this one stir, then show you 90. And for this one, we just have to let it stand and then continue on stirring until it becomes clear and everything is fully dissolved. And when that happens, what you will have, okay, let me just grab another. Okay, also remember I have sodium hydroxide prepared here. I always prepare my sodium hydroxide in bulk. And the color, after you dissolve and prepare it properly, will become clear as this one. Okay, that's why you must remember that you have to do this in a plastic container, especially for the storage. But now, I'm using glass so that you can easily see the difference. Okay? Let me just leave this here for a while and then I think that will be all for today.
Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed what I shared, please leave a like and a comment below. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon to keep you posted of my weekly uploads. Until next time, bye-bye and happy birthday to those who will be celebrating their birthdays this month. God bless!